The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution with which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information, without the expressed written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited. Welcome back to the Nova Society, the space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and together we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines and history. The big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what our guests and listeners have for us today. Today we welcome back Zolal Habibi. She is an Iranian human rights activist and prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. She serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, where she advocates globally for free, secular, and democratic Iran. With over 2 decades of activism, in recent years she has become a fierce advocate for the voiceless in Iran, often appearing on international forums, human rights conferences, and live broadcasts. Zolal's activism began in her teens, shaped by the loss of her father, a respected Iranian writer and political dissident who was killed by the regime in 1988, and we are going to be hearing from her about an update as the war in Iran continues. How is this impacting Iranian freedom? And we are pleased to have her on. Let's get started. Again, we welcome back Zolal Habibi, who joins us. She is with Iranian Freedom. She was with us a few months ago, before the war started. It
was like 2 days before.
Yeah, just a few days before. And her number one comment was, please, the United States, stay out of it. Mind your own business. And of course, we did not listen to that at all. And we are involved. So we want to welcome you back. And so tell us what's going on with Iranian freedom, with all that's going on. I mean, what's happening?
Well, since the last time we spoke, there has been a lot of changes. But I think more than ever, the policy that we had has been proven. And the world is now saying that it wasn't just, we weren't just speaking. It wasn't just mere words. It was actually concrete. This was the correct path that we were talking about. If you remember back then, I said there is a third option. The solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's to support the people of Iran to bring about change. And I think more than ever today, that has become a reality that the world is seeing with their own eyes, because we saw in the result of, 40-day war, the regime is still in place. And unfortunately, negotiations are like nothing happens and it's just life goes on this way. And but the reality is that the situation is very volatile inside of Iran. And I think the Iranian regime themselves have been giving the message of what the solution is and what they fear the most. But it's really important for the international community to actually see that and, I guess, read between the lines in a way. The reality is that, as we had mentioned before, we had said that war isn't the solution because Iran is not a classical dictatorship, that when you remove that top figure, the whole system collapses. It has a, apparatus intact. It has, the whole system is there. And so you remove Khamenei is eliminated, he's replaced by his son or whatnot, or any other cleric to that extent. And the system is still there, the IRGC is still there, the suppressive forces are still there, and they're able to function after that. And I think that is something that many did not anticipate, maybe, because day one of the war, Khamenei was eliminated. So everyone thought, okay, so this is going to be the end of this regime. But the reality is that Iran is a very vast country. Iran also plays a very important geopolitical role, something that I don't need to tell you guys, but it does. And so the circumstances are different. And it's also the number one state sponsor of international terrorism. So when you start a war with Iran, it doesn't stay within the Iranian borders. We saw that over 20 countries in the region were targeted during this war as a retaliation of the Iranian regime. So this is, I think, something that many didn't take into consideration, because with bombs over the head, the regime is not going to fall. Troops on the ground is not likely in Iran because Iran is a country 3 times the size of Iraq with 4 times the population. We have every possible terrain that you could think of to be able to reach Tehran. You have the mountain ranges. From the north, you have both the bodies of water and then the jungles and whatnot. And then we have the desert from the east. And so, as I said, the bodies of water, everyone, I think these days know where Strait of Hormuz is. They didn't know a few months ago. But the reality is that, so troops on the ground is not likely either. So war is not the solution. But it does give the regime the smokescreen that it needs to be able to keep itself afloat. After the elimination of Khamenei and many of its top commanders, the regime needed something to be able to just keep itself afloat and just keep control over society. What was their excuse? We are at war with a foreign enemy, so we have complete martial law. So we have checkpoints in every a few miles that you go. So it is okay to have internet blackout for over 80 days because we need to be able to control our, security or whatnot. So it gives the regime that excuse to be able to suppress its own people. On the other hand, the Iranian regime was playing both the victim card and the hero card for some in this war. So that also gives it that, I guess, solidarity and support that it doesn't have among the people of Iran itself. So that they're using that from, the international community or from across the world. So that is how it comes to the aid of the regime. And in fact, the only 2 parties that I can say benefit from a war or they want the continuation of war, there's actually only 2. One is the mullahs and one is the monarchists, who that is the only way that they could see Reza Pahlavi coming into power is for him to be installed there through an orchestrated, a coup d'etat or whatnot, or war, like the way his father was reinstated after Dr. Mossadegh. So that is the scenario that we're seeing. But what are we seeing on the ground in Iran? I think that the events that followed the ceasefire in Iran were a clear indication of what the regime fears the most. Just days after the ceasefire, we started seeing this wave of new executions. The executions are not usually, the Iranian regime carries out a lot of executions. Just in 2025, they carried out 2,200 executions. So the continuation of the executions isn't something new, but the regime was very hesitant in executing political prisoners because of the reaction of society. Like, for instance, last year in July, they had 2 political prisoners executed. There was an outcry internationally. It created a lot of pressure on the regime, and it had an effect on some of their relations with foreign countries, but also inside of Iran, they turned into a source of inspiration for people instead of spreading fear in society. So the regime always tried to keep like a balance, to have like more execution of just normal citizens, so that we spread fear from executions, but not so much to highlight the political prisoners or turn them into a source of inspiration for the people. But since the last week of March and beginning of April, we're seeing the execution of political prisoners and protesters from January. So far, about 50 political prisoners and protesters have been killed since April till now, including, like, for instance, just especially in the first few days of April, we had the execution of 8 members of resistance units. And then afterwards, a few others were also executed, but 8 members at that time. And then we had a whole bunch of the protesters from January who were being executed. Some of them as young as 18 years old, 19 years old, who've been executed right now. The regime wants to send this message to society that I will see no borders when it comes to keeping myself afloat. Even though they created a whole momentum in Iran society, especially the execution of Vahid Bani Omerian and 5 of those of his comrades who were together, it created a major news coverage around the world over this issue. Some places it went viral, like a video that they had of them performing a anthem in prison during the war, or things of that nature that came out, and it turned into a source of inspiration to them, and they realized that, hey, there's this whole generation in Iran right now. They're under the age of 30. They want to see change, and they're not giving up, and they know what they're doing. They're not uneducated. They're very well educated. They're very well informed, and they are the ones who, in face of the tyrant, are saying, standing steadfast, and they're making threats against the tyrants instead of it being the other way around, even in prison. And so that started like a whole momentum in Iran society, and it wasn't good for the regime, but they had no other way of continuing. And so we are seeing the continuation of these executions, unfortunately. Just this week, and one day they had 12 people executed, one day they had 8 people executed. So the regime is trying to send that message to be able to keep its grip on society, especially right now. If you remember back in January, the reason that the uprisings began was because of Iran's economic state, the strike by the bazaar. The reality is that right now, not only has that issue not been resolved, it has gotten like 100 times worse. 2 days ago, the exchange rate of Iran's currency became 200,000 tomans is equal to $1. That is unprecedented, and it's just like a hike in prices unprecedented in our history. And people are just like, how are we supposed to manage? And now they have a fuel deficiency crisis, and all of these coming together, and also like the destruction created from the war, and then the suppression in society. So all of these coming together, the regime itself and its televisions, they keep on warning that, look, this powder keg is about to explode, and we are not going to be able to control it. And they keep on saying, remember, we need to curb this fuel crisis, because that is what ignited the 2019 uprisings. In a few days, it's the anniversary of the 2022 uprising. What are we doing? So that is like the constant issue on the table right now within the regime itself. But I think that what we saw is that the regime is giving the address of the solution itself with these executions and with the suppression and with the number of execution sentences that they're handing down on a daily basis practically. Just recently, Arbavan, she received a death sentence. She's a 19-year-old girl. And 4,000 lawmakers around the world have now signed a statement, asking for that execution to be revoked, but also draws a lot of questions about how this regime is moving forward, and the fact that this younger generation is so persistent in their fight and their continuation, and that this is not something that the regime has been able to. The January uprising is not something that was done and finished. We are still seeing the continuation of people looking for the timing to be able to come to the streets, because I think we spoke about this like last time, but like 5 days before the start of the war, 250 members of resistance units carried out an operation on the headquarters of Khamenei. That was simultaneous with the protests in universities. And the regime couldn't curb the two together. So the people of Iran got this message that, oh, this is going to be the new norm. If we want to continue with uprisings, it has to be on two feet. We need to have the mass protest, but we also need to have some people who are leading that path with operations in, targeting the centers of oppression in the regime. And so that balance is what is going to move us forward. And so I think that was like the momentum in society. And then unfortunately, 5 days later, the war started. When there's bombs over your head, you're not going to be able to carry out any of those types of activities on the ground due to the circumstances. So I think that right now, that is the direction that people are going towards. We see that in the growth of the resistance union. We see that in in society right now in Iran. And especially right now, as we are marking the anniversary of the 1988 massacre these days, but also in a few days we have on September 14th will be the anniversary of the 2022 uprisings and the anniversary of the death of Mahsa Jina Amini, which led to that nationwide uprising. And so this is a very critical time for the regime, and especially with, as I said, just life has become unbearable, really. It's like hitting to the bone right now. People are just like, how are we supposed to live under these circumstances?
Yeah.
Can you just back up a second? You mentioned an operation 5 days before, right? What was the nature of that operation? What was it actually? What happened?
What happened was that 250 members of resistance units. Resistance units are these units that work underground in society. They're local, so during the day they have their normal lives, but they carry out like different operations underground and work. Usually it's mostly concentrated on raising awareness and keeping hope alive, but they also do carry out like operations against centers of oppression. Like for instance, during the uprisings in January, the resistance units carried out 630 operations, which were like, for instance, when people were being arrested, they had them released. They were able to like disarm, the suppressive forces in few cities and be able to turn it over to the people, things of that nature. But so what they were able to do was, at a time that the regime was on heightened security, because it was a few days before the start of the war and everyone knew that, a war can break out any minute really during those days. And at the same time that, if we go back, universities have been shut down since January till February 22nd or 23rd, I believe. And the day that the universities resumed classes on campus, protests broke out in universities across Iran. And the day after that, the start of the protest, these resistance units, 250 members, they carried out an operation on the headquarters of Khamenei in Tehran. And what was seen was, because that was the day that the regime was also, limiting internet connection and everything, some images started being shared on social media that there are tanks in the streets of Tehran in the vicinity of Khamenei's headquarters. And everyone was like, we don't know what's going on. Something's going on there. And the thing is that the members of the resistance units, they knew that they weren't going to go in and overthrow Khamenei, but it was the message that they were giving to society mostly, that they were able to infiltrate the most secure location in the country at a time that they were on heightened security, and it was being guarded by over 8,000 security forces. But 250 people were able to do that. So it just showed how weak the regime is. And unfortunately, in that operation, about 100 people were either killed or arrested. But the fact that they did that, it just broke a fear in society after the uprisings in January. And it had that message that, look, this is going to be the new path forward if we want to continue the uprisings and not let it die away, because we need to go hand in hand and we need to be able to push this forward till the overthrow of the regime. So that was what happened then.
So I'm guessing that it's been exaggerated here that the people have rallied around the flag because of the attacks by the U.S. on the regime and on the country.
Well, I think that rallying around the flag is really not what has happened in Iran, but there is this thing that, well, no one wants to see their country be bombed, because at the end of the day, these weren't just targeted attacks. It was it's a war. It has casualties, both human casualties and like the infrastructures that were being destroyed, like the water centers that were hit, power centers that were hit. So it really has made a tremendous impact on the lives of people. So people were opposed to a war because they also have this. We have to take into consideration the historic background too. We do not have a positive experience with foreign intervention in Iran. If you look in So the people of Iran, they're like, yes, we want regime change, but regime change at the end of the day has to come from the people, or it has to, even if you're going to be meddling or whatever, it needs to be something that the people of Iran can utilize to further their fight against the regime, not limited. And in fact, the reality is that when there's bombs over their heads, people had to take shelter, and there was complete, as I mentioned, for over 3 months, even after the war had ended. For over 3 months, there was complete martial law intact in Iran. People said like there were checkpoints. Like if you were going in at like 30-minute distance, you would definitely pass a checkpoint. And in the checkpoints, they weren't just checking your car or your ID. They were even taking people's phones, and they would check certain apps to see when is the last time that app got connected, because there was an internet blackout. They wanted to see who is, circumventing the blackout, and that they arrested like hundreds of people because of that, just because like, I don't know, they had access to their Instagram account or something like that in that time period, and they said, oh, you must be in contact with, foreign governments or this and that, and had them arrested. So that crackdown was a major help to the regime, and a major setback for the people of Iran in that sense. But I think that, the reality is that the Iranian regime itself knows that it doesn't have that much popular support that it can count on. Based on their own statistics, the regime always says it's like less than 10%. So it's not, rallying around the flag was not the issue. The regime did bring in people from other countries to come and present themselves as rallying around the flag.
That's interesting.
And there were videos that came out of like there were people that they were paying to act, I guess, and then you could see them in like different scenes. That same person, not think that, I mean, the regime should have been smart enough that these things are going to surface on social media, but they hadn't thought of that. And so, the regime is very good at propaganda, I guess. So they
very good. Yeah. Two things surprised me. But the first one is, you've mentioned a lot of executions. I saw that an Afghani was executed like a week ago. And my assumption was that they were going after Afghanis because they don't want to execute Iranians.
He was because there are a lot of Afghans who were like born and raised in Iran, and he is one of those. He was in the protest. He was arrested during the January protest, and he was executed.
But it seemed to me that the idea there was that he's not from Iran himself, and we can execute somebody who's not from Iran but is in the country without alienating our own people. Now, but you're saying that there are, massive amounts of executions, 50 or, 8 at one time, and this young woman who people are protesting. I don't see any of that in the media here. You grew up in the DC area, right? So you probably look at the Washington Post. I'm a New Yorker, so I get the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and I don't see and you would think that the Trump administration would play up all these executions as a way to rally people around. But really what we see here is that instead of terrorism, instead of, suppression of their own people, they send out these really clever Lego videos and things like that make fun of Trump, and has actually gotten a lot of people in this country to sort of think of the regime there as entertaining, funny, like live, just like lit. They're amazing, at what they do. And so that there's more support now, I think, for the government of Iran from people here in this country than there ever has been before, because they're not seeing what you are talking about. They're only seeing these really clever videos, and there's not anybody committing suicide bombings here in the States and things like that. So they've done I think that the regime has done a really good job as far as that is concerned. And typically, the Trump administration has fallen flat on playing up that aspect of the terror, the reign of terror in Iran itself, that would cause more people here to rally around the cause of getting rid of this regime or actively resisting the Republican Guard and so on.
Well, I think that there are two. I think you're completely correct in what you just stated. I think there's two aspects. As I mentioned, the war has created a pretext for the regime to play both cards, both the victim card and the hero card, because it's standing in favor of the U.S. And unfortunately, due to certain policies, well, there are a lot of people who are going to align themselves with that narrative and not knowingly fall into the spectrum of supporting the regime because they don't have that understanding of what the regime is and how complex this regime works. And that is unfortunately one of the realities that we are faced with. But the reality is that, on the other hand, um, the people of Iran are not falling for that, but it is like in Western countries, this is the issue. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, media a lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of journalists don't do the job that they're supposed to. But I did see, like, especially in, I guess, mostly in the UK, I saw a lot of coverage of the this new wave of executions. Some major publications like the Sunday Telegraph, the Times, they started, covering this, and it got a lot of traction. Based on that, I saw that this is a few months back, and I guess it's one in millions that gets that coverage, and then it should be more. But there was like the New York Post, I think, that did the video of these six, political prisoners who were executed all in 1 week, and that went viral. And from that, a lot of like different outlets started picking this up, like the theme itself. And then they started doing interviews with like members of the family and whatnot to cover this. So it started getting a bit of traction, but this is back in April or May. The reality is that one of the things that is very dismaying to maybe many is that when you speak about the negotiations with Iran right now, everyone is talking about, Iran's nuclear program, the Strait of Hormuz, and this and that. The, the issue that is missing from the table is the Iranian people. In fact, one of the reasons that you did not hear too much about the new wave of execution, especially in the US, is because during negotiations, all countries tried to be silent to some extent in this regard because they didn't want it to have a effect on the negotiations and for the regime to pull out of the negotiations. And the Iranian regime understood that. And that's why they're like, oh, this is a time that we have, a green light to carry out these executions, because the regime also has this experience from 1988. What happened in 1988 massacre? The executions began the week of the ceasefire. Technology and communication wasn't what it is today, but the world was informed about the massacre in August. But everyone stayed silent because after 8 years, the Iran-Iraq war had come to an end, and everyone was like, "Look, this is just a ceasefire. It's not a peace treaty. It's not anything. It's very fragile. So let's just not get into it." And with that, they turned a blind eye, and 30,000 people were executed. This time around, one of the things that really shocked me was the fact that I remember that last year in July, practically like 10 countries, even though it was in July, it was during summer vacation time that, many of these international entities are closed or whatnot. Parliaments are closed. The international reaction is less always during the summers. But despite that, like 10 countries gave a statement condemning the execution of these two political prisoners back in July of last year. This year, in you know, as I said, within 1 month at least, like 30 political prisoners were executed, and not one country gave a statement. But the UN special rapporteurs did, and usually they're the last ones to give a statement. But they did, and no country did. And in fact, the first statement that has come out about this new wave of executions is last week. Finally, like a statement from the European countries, like it's 32 countries who have given a statement in regards to Iran's wave of executions, but after the negotiations and everything was finished. Put yourself in the shoes of the regime. That sends you a message and gives you a green light to continue, and knowing that no one's going to do anything about it, or they could care less, unfortunately. The plight of the Iranian people, they have their own interests in mind when they are negotiating with the Iranian regime.
Yeah, I think one thing that you're going to find, that we warned you about this back in February, was that if he gets, I think right now, if Trump gets the Strait of Hormuz open, that would be enough, and he'll back away from all the other issues, including regime change and what is best for the Iranian people.
Of course, I mean, we're not naive. We have no, misunderstandings when it comes to the fact that no country is going to put the people of Iran before their own interests. It's not, unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in right now. Hopefully one day there will be people who will stand by their morals before standing behind their interests, but that's not now. And so we have no, illusions in this regard. That is why we have always believed that the solution to Iran is the people of Iran and their organized resistance. We have a saying that we say, no one's going to scratch your back except your own finger. And that is very solid right now. And I think that's something that we've seen time and time again. And the reality is that there are a lot of people who say, well, I mean, you guys haven't been able to overthrow the regime yet yourself. And they don't take into consideration like how much aid this policy of appeasement has given to the regime, even today, because we were just mentioning, like in June, we had organized a rally against this new wave of executions in Iran, because it was on June 20th, which is the day of political prisoners and executions, people in Iran, historically. For us, it's a very important day. And this year was the 45th anniversary of that, because it was the first peaceful protest on June 20th, 1981, was the first peaceful protest that Khomeini opened fire on. And from that day on, there was no means to be able to practice, a peaceful resistance towards this regime and to be able to create change. And that was like the end of that era. And so on that day, we were organizing a rally in Paris. 100,000 people had gathered for this from around Europe, from everywhere. And a lot of work had gone into it. I mean, you could just imagine the cost of putting something like that together by the diaspora. And for months before, the French government knew they had gotten, because of the prominent speakers who were going to be in attendance, there were some who were foreign prime ministers and heads of state and whatnot. So they knew that because of that, they had actually organized all of the security details and everything like that too from beforehand. And what happened that the day before, not even one day before, like less than 24 hours before the event, you cancel the event that months of preparation has gone into it. And then in the statement that because we took that decision to courts immediately, and they knew the whole process. They knew that by the time that the courts give a response, it's going to be probably too late and whatnot. So they dragged their feet. They gave the email canceling the event at about 6 or 7 p.m. So that doesn't leave much time to act on anything, because all offices were closed. People were already had arrived in Paris. It wasn't like, or they were on the way. The companies who were, doing the preparations, they were already on the ground setting up. So, it was a very difficult situation. And, at the end of the day, I mean, they could have just canceled it like beforehand. They could have said like, this is the situation, we can't do this. The note that they gave the police, they said, oh, because of threats made, bomb threats made, we canceled the event. And threats made by the Iranian regime. So in details, when they got into the detail, they're like, oh, some monarchists were making bomb threats, and then the Iranian regime was also putting pressure for this event to be canceled. And so that is why it was canceled. And the fact that there were 5 phone calls between Iran's foreign minister and the French foreign minister, um, and the day that they canceled the event, there was a hour-long discussion between them. I mean, it's clear what
Yeah.
they're negotiating on. But I think that, yes, they didn't allow us to hold the event, but I think the message of the event spread really fast because
Okay.
everyone, this is, the people of Iran, they came, but the regime fears them so much that even abroad, they can't even, have them have their rally. How is
Yeah.
that going to, thousands of miles away? But the fact that the regime does that, it gives they're giving the address of who they fear the most, and that there is a viable alternative then. But it's very important for the international community to realize that, look, every time, who are you using as the bargaining chip at the negotiation table? It's the people of Iran who are paying that price, and they're paying that price with their lives. So, please, we don't want any support. Just stop giving into the demands of the Iranian regime and allow the people of Iran to take their destiny into their own hands. That's not something complex that we're asking for. Um, we're not asking for troops on the ground. We're not asking for financial support. We're not asking for any of that. We have the capability to bring about that change. But unfortunately, you keep on tying our hands with your negotiations and with your positive appeasement.
Yeah, well, I hate to say this, and at the risk of creating an international incident, that's pretty on brand for France. You know, caving, giving in, allowing others to power play them. That's been probably tested many, many times. You mentioned a number of diplomats who signed a document about this young woman who was condemned to death. Was the United States one of those?
There were people from the United States who signed it. It wasn't any governments. It was just personalities and lawmakers who signed it on. But yeah, there were people from the U.S. who signed on to it too.
But not our government.
No, no.
There is one thing when you were talking about media and stuff like this. Of course, we've said here on the podcast numerous times, if there's a place where truth goes to die, it's definitely whenever there's a war or conflict. Of course, as far as the people of the United States, at least those that are not in the know and only watch one certain news agency, we've won this war 40 times. According to our president, we have done really, really well. And what I want to ask is, and again, I understand that, with the United States attacking Iran, we're obviously not very popular with anybody in the Iranian in Iran, and we shouldn't be, because the bottom line is that we started this. But as ineffective, when you look at the what the expectations were in the beginning, if you looked at it from a post World War II attitude, this should have been a cakewalk for the United States, and it wasn't. Are the people of Iran looking at the United States in a similar way that, let's say, the people in Ukraine are looking at the Russians and saying, you know what, you guys aren't all you said you were? Is this becoming an attitude in Iran and maybe in the region throughout?
I think that for a lot of Iranians, the issue wasn't so much concentrated on. First of all, I think the delusion that there might be for those who thought that, oh, maybe foreign help would be helpful. I think that is something that has gone by now. But I think people started realizing that, especially when they saw, because the US entered the war, or in general, the war was started under the pretext of standing by the people of Iran. But then people started seeing that they were just that excuse for the war. It wasn't because of them, or it didn't. I mean, they're not even one of the points, the 12 points that were in the original statements is not the people of Iran. So they realized that, okay, so this had really nothing to do with the people of Iran. At the end of the day, it is, you know, because of interest in these different countries. I think that for the people of Iran, one of the things that became clearer is they're looking at it from an Iranian perspective. They're not looking at it from a, international perspective or a U.S. perspective. from an Iranian perspective, they realized that, look, we can't depend on anyone else to do this. This is something that we have to do it ourselves. No one understands the Iranian regime better than the people of Iran and how complex it is. People don't have, governments don't have the understanding of what reality of the Iranian regime is. Sometimes they overestimate the regime. They think the regime is more stronger than it is. Because right now the regime is the weakest place it has ever been. But to understand that and not think that, oh, the regime was in a position of power, that's why they didn't lose in the war. No, the war in itself, if you look at it from even from a military perspective, the scenario was wrong. You can't have it. I mean, under any circumstances, it would not have led to a victory. No matter who was the president, and no matter what tactic they used, scenario does not match for Iran. It doesn't work. So it's something that I think that it was a miscalculation on the part of the powers who were involved in this war. But and maybe to them this was what they wanted. They just wanted the regime to become in a weaker place to be able to negotiate with it better. Because I think at the end of the day, the U.S. government its issue has never been a democracy in Iran. It has been, having the upper hand in being able to push away maybe some of the issues that they have with Iran or the threats that Iran poses because of its geopolitical role in the region and because of its sponsorship of terrorism. So I think that those who were looking at the war based on the rhetoric that they heard in the news, that this is to support the people of Iran and this and that, they probably were, a bit disillusioned about what happened and why did it happen this way. Does it mean that the US is weak? Does it mean that Iran is strong? What does it mean? But the reality is that if you look at it logically, the reality is that this is what they were aiming for. They were not aiming for regime change from day one. And the path to regime change is not this. So that is clear. Let's be in the clear with that. And then once we have that understanding, we can understand this war in a different context and what it was hoping to achieve and how far it went or whatnot. So I think that the whole scenario needs to be worked out differently to understand like how this war went forward and what was, I mean, let's not just concentrate on the headlines. What was actually the goal and what were they aiming for and what were they able to accomplish? I think in that context, things would be different. And I think right now, this is unfortunate, but the reality is one of those who pushed for these wars are some of these, weaponry companies. I was amazed to see that they were promoting the war from beforehand, like so openly. Like, I think Politico had a conference on Iran, and the main sponsor was Lockheed Martin, and this is like 2 weeks before the war. A few others like that too, and I was like that openly, you're going to be doing this. It's not something that you're even trying to hide. So
yeah,
job security.
Yeah, that's exactly.
The Iranian regime was, laughing about this. They're like, yeah, the reality is that our military doesn't compare, but we just use these drones that cost us like $500 each, while the U.S. was using these or in Israel were using these very expensive equipment that we just hit with one of these, drones, and it just changes the balance. And like, who thinks about even the cost of this for the U.S. tax dollars and whatnot?
Yeah. And that, when we chuckle about this, it's because we understand that, and we've said this so many times, we still have the post-World War II mindset. And, Iran is using drones to take down $35 million jets and things like that. That's kind of an embarrassing kind of thing for us. And I think and the other reason is when you mentioned about Lockheed Martin holding that conference, even here in the United States, I would say probably 90%, maybe, Scott, you correct me if I'm wrong, have no idea what the goal was in this whole thing. We have no clue.
It was
We
like
have had
five of
some of the
them.
most educated people in the world sit around here in the United States and say, we can't figure out exactly what the purpose of this was. And I think that caused the chaos.
There was like a different reason given, so that didn't really help.
Well, we've
Right.
gotten used to that here. I mean, we really have gotten used to, today it's one thing and then tomorrow it's another. Like I said, according to the administration, we've won this war, what, 39 times. And then, oops, no, we did not. And we've had a deal, I don't know, 15 times. And oops, no, we do not. Oh, we have a ceasefire. Well, not really. So,
Right.
so here,
They're begging us for help. They're begging us for a deal.
yeah. So, I mean, we
It's
get
not,
the
and none of this is helpful for your cause.
No, absolutely not.
But
And that,
and by the way, the JCPOA was not helpful to your cause, right? I mean, in a sense, Donald Trump ripping up that deal and leaving it, and giving your government, the government of Iran, the opportunity to reconstitute their nuclear weapons program played better into your hands because it created more international outrage over that attempt to to become a nuclear weapons country, which could have led to regime change and could have led to a democratic republic in Iran, not this Islamic republic, and could have been a real positive for probably for the world, but they disrupted the peace process by bombing the people who they were negotiating with. I mean, to me, that was, akin to Pearl Harbor. You don't kill the people that you're negotiating with if you want to get some kind of deal done. But now I have to ask you this question because it comes back again. I asked you this the last time we spoke. Is time on your side?
Time is always on our side because we only have to win once.
Okay.
And no, I think that unfortunately the issue, our fight is very complex because it's not only between us and the regime. There's so many different players who have an effect on this war, but we can't. The key has been that we keep our concentration on the regime only and only on the regime, and I think that has been what has allowed us to be able to continue and not be affected by all these whirlwinds that come and go when it comes to the issue of Iran. And right now, our main concentration is still on that correct strategy to be able to overthrow this regime, and that is overthrown by the people of Iran. That path has been very helpful to us. I was speaking to a group of Iranian youth in the diaspora, people who their parents are Iranian. They've never actually been to Iran, most of them themselves, but we were discussing this issue, and they're like, you know what? A few years back, when the resistance kept on emphasizing on where it draws the line, this slogan, "Down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs." I back then was like, why are we even mentioning this? Why now? Why is it important? And now they're the ones who and a lot of programs are like, why are you not giving this slogan? Why are we not, emphasizing it? I'm like, you guys are starting to understand. And they're like, no, this is key. This is a key element. If we want to see change in Iran, we need to draw that line between all forms of tyranny and dictatorship in Iran. And this is something that's really important. And I think in the past, even 2-3 months, this atmosphere that I saw from our youth activists, I've seen in the Iranian diaspora and people inside of Iran too. They realized that, look, what happened in 1979 was everyone was rallying around the flag to have the Shah gone. And they're like, whatever comes next, I mean, we'll figure it out. And then that's how Khomeini hijacked the revolution. This time around, there were days in 2022, everyone was like, let's just all work together and see how now that everyone, because it was always there's this resistance that is fighting continuously. And then there are these waves that when uprising happens, a whole bunch of people come and they want to become active. And each time, there are some who break those bridges behind them with the regime or whatnot. And so they're like, let's all just get along and overthrow this regime. But then they started realizing that you can't create a solidarity front or a united front with just anyone. Because if you, it'll deteriorate or it'll divert the path that you're going. Your path is going this way to a secular democratic republic. The other person is going to another direction. It's not going to be helpful, and the regime uses that. As I said, I think one of the things that the regime has benefited from is that a lot of powers, a lot of analysts, a lot of those who are working on the issue of Iran, they don't understand the nature of the regime and the complexity of how this regime is working, because this regime for 47 years, it has been concentrated on keeping itself afloat. And there are no principles that they're not willing to put, under their feet to be able to keep themselves alive. So that makes it very, very complex. And so only this resistance that has solely concentrated on this regime, and they are, the arch enemies of one another, has that understanding and knows that, look, we have no issue. Because a lot of people used to ask this, like I remember a few years ago, they're like, you guys always say if anyone is able to overthrow this regime, hats off to them, we will go behind them and we will support them. Then how come you keep on emphasizing that the line is drawn between, dictatorships? That means both the current regime and the previous monarchy or whatnot. And then nowadays they realize that, oh, the only reason we're doing that, it's not like we have an issue of, it's not like political parties, fighting one another, or like what you see in a election year or something, campaign or whatnot. It's the issue of that final destination. Are they going to reach that final destination? No, they're going to a different direction. So if we want to concentrate on that final destination, this is the path that we need to go, and we need to draw those lines, and we need to, show people that path. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to the international arena too. It's very important to understand, there is a third option. There is a viable alternative. The people around have the ability to create change. Nothing else is going to work. And because the regime is very complex, they are going to manipulate. They have the power to manipulate a lot of Western powers, because these Western powers are a democracy. So as Khomeini used to joke, he used to say that I'm the constant. These other governments, they change every 4 years. So I just have to drag my feet for 4 years, and then the next person comes, and then they have to start all over. They don't have the experiences of the previous administrations, really. A lot of the administrations are now going to share like their downfalls or things of that nature, where they, were caught off guard by the regime. So the regime plays that card well, and they just have to play, good cop, bad cop, or whatever, and just drag time was to their benefit. But for us, I also think that time is in our benefit right now, because as we move forward, I think that step by step, Iran society is also evolving in their fight against this regime. And they are learning, every time or every step that we take, there's certain things that become clearer for the people. So the direction is becoming more concentrated on how we need to overthrow this regime and how that is done. And a lot of things that maybe were just scenarios that we talk about, to us, they weren't scenarios. We knew that this is like the hard fact. But for those who were hearing it, they thought, these were like different scenarios that we were giving. Now those are becoming clearer. And I think that is a path that is going to help the people of Iran eventually. And I don't think that the fall of the regime is too far, because right now the regime has reached a point that they are not able to deal with a lot of the crisis that they are facing in society.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the war, the economical crisis in Iran right now, the regime has no solutions for it. Right now, they're just keeping it under caps by saying that there's a war right now, so we need to just keep everything silent right now because there's a foreign enemy, or there's a war, or there's this volatile international situation. But if that is pushed aside, then it's the fight is between the people of Iran and the regime, and they are on the brink of exploding really society because people literally have nothing to lose anymore. I mean, life is truly unbearable. I just saw a video just right before our podcast today of a young man. He's a farmer and he had brought like all of these, chicks that had been killed, had died because of the power outages and everything that's going on right now. And it's, making like companies, a lot of them are suffering from it. And like a lot of things are not working and there's not running water. So like these two, issues, they're very basic issues, electricity and water, that is lacking has created like all of this destruction for society. And this young man, I think he was probably in like his early 30s. And he threw like gasoline on himself and he was about to light himself. And the guards were just like watching him from that ministry that he had gone to. And they were just watching him do that. And it was the people who tried to stop him, but they didn't do anything about it. And I think people that come to that level, I mean, self-emulation is like the last level in people being, fed up with anything in society. And when that becomes normalized in society, that means that this regime is truly, these people have nothing to lose. So if that spark is ignited again, you will see that they're willing to give it their all because literally they can't live this way anymore. And I think that is something that we need to concentrate on a bit more and have that understanding of the situation inside of Iran. The people of Iran at this point, they're not looking at world powers to bring change. They're looking at themselves. And to do that, they are organizing, they are mobilizing, and they are working underground for that moment, for this time around, for them to be prepared for it and to learn from the lessons that they've learned from each uprising to be able to make it more, I guess, I don't want to use radical because the term has a negative note to it, but just being concentrate more on, that final goal.
Yeah, I will say this: when this is all over, there's going to be a lot of work for organizations like yours to do, not only internally but also externally, because we're all we have to suffer the sins of the father. And the fact is that we've said on this podcast numerous times, with the actions the United States has taken, it is going to take some time for our administration to regain, if it ever can regain, the respect that it had before this war. And in Iran's case, one of the issues they're going to have to deal with is the attacking of their neighbors that have happened during this conflict. That's going to have to be mended at some point in time. And again, there's going to be an awful lot of work to do, and that's going to be a very interesting conversation because, let's face it, Iran is part of the world in the world community, and the fact is that everybody's got to try to play nice, at least give it a shot. And Iran could be a very important, productive partner in the world affairs, and I think everybody would like to see that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you guys would. I'm sure you would. So thank you very much for coming back on. We want to have you back on again as things develop, because let's face it, things are just kind of moving along. We think, of course, what we're being told is quite different than what you're being told, and we want to get your opinion. It's good to hear from somebody that is connected, as opposed to we're half the world away. And we're just taking by what we get out of what we can glean out of the news, and most of that is not really the factual what's going on. So we want you to make sure you stay safe. We hope you guys are doing well, and we hope that some opportunity comes up so that you can make some progress within your home country.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you, and we hope that we will have better news on Iran soon. But I know that, there are thousands and thousands of people who are actively working for it. Here in the diaspora, but also, the resistance units on the ground, the people there who are truly the rebellious youth that we're seeing throughout Iran. I think that this is a new phenomenon that we're dealing with this generation, but they really want to see that change, and I hope that we do see that change soon, because it is taking very high toll on the people of Iran. But on that note, actually on September 22nd and 23rd, actually in New York, there's going to be a rally in front of the UNGA to voice support for what I just mentioned. So the message is stop executions in Iran, and that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's to support the people of Iran to bring about change. So actually thousands from across the U.S. are coming together in that rally on.
Now that's next month, September?
September.
Yeah. Okay.
So we should talk on the September 25th is a Friday. We should talk that day.
Yeah.
See how that goes. Absolutely. Well,
I have so much more to ask you and to say, but I will leave it here, about that young man who poured the gasoline on his head, that there are people who believe that there are causes worth dying for, but you have to watch out for those people who believe that there are causes worth killing for.
Exactly. That just shows like the people's desperation, and they're not ones to. I think what is really, you see their innocence here. They're not.
Another word for that might be naive.
No, not naive, but like the fact that they implement that pain on themselves instead of taking that rage on someone else, and I think that just shows like how desperate they are to be able to tell the world, like, look, we are suffering here, like, do something. Or even to people in their own society, they're not inflicting that pain on others, and I think that's what's really important. But it just shows like how innocent these human beings are, whose lives are being taken away one by one these days. And it's very painful to see, because you think to yourself, if we could even move up the overthrow of this regime by one day, just look at how many lives it would save. And it just adds to our responsibility to bring about that change the sooner, to end the suffering of the people of Iran, and also the people in the region who are affected by this. It's not just Iranians who are affected by the crimes perpetrated by this regime. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Hopefully we'll get to talk to you again next month. I would really welcome that.
Have a nice day.
You take care. And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Scott Gershwer and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.